I had a bright future filled with love ahead of me, or so I thought. Who knew that the fire of my husband's first love would turn me and my life to ash? Mornings were my favorite part of the day. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the warmth of the ovens made the bakery feel like home. I'd always wanted a place like this, where people could come for a good croissant and leave with a smile. It wasn't just my dream, it was our dream. Caleb had been there from the beginning, cheering me on when I decided to open my bakery. Caleb, my husband, had this way of making everything feel possible. He was the practical one, a financial consultant who could crunch numbers like nobody's business, but he always had time to listen to me go on about recipes and business ideas. He said my passion inspired him, and I believed him. Life felt good. Not perfect. Nothing ever is, but it was ours. That morning, Caleb was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, his dark hair slightly messy from sleep. He was scrolling through his phone, a half smile on his face. I was icing a tray of cinnamon rolls when I noticed him pause, his finger hovering over the screen. "Everything okay?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. He looked up startled, like I'd caught him off guard. "Yeah, just an old friend reaching out. No big deal." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Caleb had a lot of friends from different parts of his life: college, work, even neighbors from his childhood. He wasn't the type to keep secrets, so I didn't press. The rest of the day went by like usual. I spent the morning at the bakery, chatting with regulars and experimenting with a new scone recipe. Caleb stopped by around lunchtime, bringing me my favorite coffee. He did that often, small gestures that made me feel loved, even when things got busy. It wasn't until that evening that I noticed something different. We were watching TV, something light and funny to wind down after a long day. Caleb's phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I glanced at the screen. The name Lily popped up. "Who's Lily?" I asked casually, leaning back on the couch. He hesitated just for a second. "Oh, she's someone I used to know, from way back." He didn't elaborate and I didn't push, but that name stuck with me. I didn't know why at the time, but something about the way he said it made me uneasy. It was the tiniest crack in what felt like an unshakable foundation. Looking back, I wish I'd asked more questions. But in that moment, I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? Caleb and I were a team. At least that's what I thought. It started with a conversation at the kitchen table. Caleb was tapping his fingers against his coffee cup, a habit of his when he was nervous. I was flipping through my notebook, planning the week's specials for the bakery, when he spoke. "So, I've been meaning to tell you something," he began, his voice a little too casual. I set the notebook down and raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" He hesitated, and that tiny pause made my stomach clench. "Do you remember that old friend I mentioned? The one who texted me?" "Lily, right?" The name sounded sharper out loud than I intended. "Yeah," he said, shifting in his seat. She was someone I dated a long time ago, before we even met. We were serious for a while, but then she just disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye. It was like she dropped off the face of the earth. I blinked, caught off guard. "Wow, that's intense." "Yeah," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "She reached out recently, said she wanted to reconnect. I guess she felt bad about how things ended." I searched his face, trying to read between the lines. Caleb wasn't the type to leave details out on purpose, but there was something about the way he avoided my eyes that made me uneasy. "And?" I asked carefully. He sighed. "I'm curious, I guess. It's been so long, and I never got closure. But it's just curiosity, Sarah, that's all." The words felt genuine, but something inside me tensed anyway. "You're sure?" "Of course," he said, leaning forward to take my hand. "You're my wife, Sarah. Lily's just a part of my past." That should have reassured me, but the uneasiness didn't go away. A few days later, I met Lily. She came to the bakery. Caleb must have told her about it because she walked in like she'd been there 100 times before, her eyes scanning the place with calculated interest. "Hi, you must be Sarah." She extended a perfectly manicured hand, her voice smooth and confident. I forced a polite smile and shook her hand. "That's me. And you're Lily, I presume?" "Guilty as charged," she said with a laugh that felt rehearsed. Lily was beautiful, in the kind of way that made you second-guess yourself. Tall, blonde, and dressed like she'd walked off the set of a fashion shoot, But it wasn't her looks that unsettled me. It was the way she carried herself, like she already knew she was the center of attention. "I've heard so much about you," she said, glancing around the bakery. "This place is charming." I didn't miss the pause before charming. "Thanks," I replied evenly. "It's been a labor of love." Caleb walked in a moment later, his face lighting up when he saw Lily. "Hey, didn't know you'd be here already." They hugged, and I felt a pang of something sharp and uncomfortable. Over the next few weeks, Lily inserted herself into our lives in ways that felt too convenient to be accidental. She'd invite Caleb to coffee, claiming she needed advice about adjusting to town life again. She'd text him about things that felt trivial, like asking for recommendations for restaurants. At first, Caleb was transparent about their interactions, but as time went on, he stopped mentioning them altogether. I'd catch glimpses of his phone lighting up with her name, or he'd come home later than usual, muttering something about running into Lily. "You're spending a lot of time with her," I said one evening, trying to keep my tone neutral. "She doesn't know many people here," Caleb replied, shrugging. "I feel bad. She's been through a lot, Sarah." I wanted to scream. "What about me? What about what I've been through for you?" But instead, I just nodded. "Okay." It wasn't just the time he spent with her. It was the way he started pulling away from me. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped bringing me coffee at the bakery, something he'd done religiously for years. When I told him about a big catering order I'd landed, he barely looked up from his phone. "You don't think you're overreacting?" my best friend Rachel asked when I vented to her one evening. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I am, but it feels like he's slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it." Rachel frowned. "Have you told him how you feel?" "I've tried," I said, my voice cracking, "but he always brushes it off, like I'm imagining things." I didn't say what I was really thinking, that Lily wasn't just a part of Caleb's past anymore. She was becoming a part of his present, and I was terrified of what that meant for our future. The air between Caleb and me felt heavier every day. It was like an invisible wall had sprung up between us, and no matter how hard I tried to reach him, he was on the other side, drifting further away. One night, I walked into the living room to find him scrolling through his phone, a soft smile tugging at his lips. I didn't have to ask who he was texting, I already knew. "Is that Lily again?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. He glanced up, startled, then frowned. "Yeah, she's just checking in. Why?" "Because you've been spending more time checking in with her than with me," I replied, sitting down across from him. His frown deepened. "Sarah, don't start. She's an old friend, someone I feel like I let down. I'm just trying to be there for her." I clenched my fists, trying to hold back the wave of frustration bubbling inside me. "An old friend? Caleb, she's not just some old friend. She's your ex, and she's clearly not here just to catch up." "What are you even talking about?" he said, shaking his head. "You're being ridiculous." Ridiculous. The word stung more than it should have. The next day, I decided enough was enough. I was going to confront Lily directly. She was easy to find. Too easy. She'd taken to hanging around my bakery like it was her second home, casually sipping lattes and smiling at my customers like she belonged there. When I approached her table, she greeted me with that infuriatingly sweet smile. "Sarah, what a lovely surprise." "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice low. Her smile didn't falter. "Of course. Sit down." I didn't sit. "I'm going to be straightforward. I know what you're doing." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" "You're trying to take Caleb away from me," I said firmly. "And I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work." For a moment, her mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed and her smile turned sharp. "You're bolder than I thought," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But let me make one thing clear. Caleb and I are meant to be together. You were just a placeholder." The words hit me like a slap. "You're delusional if you think Caleb will leave me for you." Her smirk deepened. "Oh, honey, he already has. He just doesn't realize it yet. And if you keep getting in my way, I'll make sure you regret it." "What's that supposed to mean?" I demanded. "You'll find out soon enough," she said, standing up and brushing past me like the conversation was over. That night, I told Caleb everything. I repeated her words, her threats, hoping he'd finally see what she was doing. Instead, he looked at me like I was the problem. "Do you hear yourself right now?" he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Lily isn't like that. She's not some manipulative villain, Sarah." "Caleb, she admitted it," I cried, my frustration boiling over. "She told me she wants to take you away from me." He shook his head, standing up from the couch. "No, Sarah, what's happening is you're jealous. You can't stand the idea of me being friends with her." "Friends?" I laughed bitterly. "She's not your friend, Caleb. She's a snake." "That's enough," he snapped, his tone cold and unfamiliar. "I'm not going to sit here and let you tear her down like this. I thought you were better than that." My heart sank. He didn't believe me. Or maybe he didn't want to believe me. Either way, I was losing him. Over the next few weeks, the tension only grew. Caleb spent more and more time away from home, and when he was home, he was distant, distracted. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, watching it crumble before my eyes. I couldn't help but wonder, was I fighting for something that was already gone? Or was Lily right all along? The smell of fresh bread and pastries filled the air as I unlocked the bakery door. The routine was comforting: kneading dough, arranging the display cases, chatting with regulars. This was my haven, the place I had built from scratch. I barely stepped inside when I saw her. Lily. She was leaning against the lamppost outside, arms crossed, her perfect smirk aimed directly at me. My chest tightened. I had no time for her games today. Taking a deep breath, I walked outside. "What do you want, Lily? We've already had this conversation." She pushed off the lamppost, strolling toward me like she owned the world. "I just thought we should talk one last time, woman to woman." I crossed my arms, narrowing my eyes. "There's nothing left to say." "Oh, I think there is," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're in the way, Sarah. Caleb doesn't belong with you. He belongs with me." I laughed bitterly. "You're delusional, Lily. Caleb is my husband." "For now," she said, her smile sharpening. "But we both know how this ends. He'll come back to me. It's only a matter of time." I stepped closer, my hands trembling with anger. "You need to stay away from us. Do you hear me? Whatever game you're playing, it ends now." Her smile faltered for a second before she recovered, her tone turning icy. "You're making a mistake, Sarah. You think you can win this? You're nothing compared to me. You're just ordinary." I clenched my fists. "Get out of here, Lily. You're not welcome near my bakery or my life." She leaned in, her voice a whisper. "You should have listened." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving a chill in her wake. I shook off the unease and forced myself to focus on the busy day ahead. Hours later, the lunch rush had died down. The bakery was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the ovens. I was in the office going over inventory when a strange noise from the kitchen caught my attention. Metal clanging and a faint hiss. I rushed in and froze. There she was, Lily crouched by the ovens, fiddling with the controls. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. She stood up slowly, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "I warned you, Sarah, but you didn't listen." "Get out of here!" I yelled, grabbing my phone to call the police. Before I could dial, she lunged toward me and shoved me back. I stumbled, crashing into a stack of baking trays. The phone flew out of my hand. "You're not ruining this for me," she hissed, shoving me into the storage room and slamming the door. The lock clicked, trapping me inside. "Lily!" I screamed, pounding on the door. "Let me out!" Through the small window, I saw her crank the ovens to their maximum settings. She glanced back at me one last time, smirking as flames began to flicker. Thick black smoke poured into the room. My throat burned as I coughed, my heart racing. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the roar of the fire drowned out my voice. I grabbed a metal shelf, trying to break the door down, but it wouldn't budge. My vision blurred as tears mixed with the stinging smoke. The thought of never seeing Caleb again, of never setting foot in my bakery again, clawed at my chest. Then, through the window, I saw him. Caleb. He had arrived, his face pale with horror as he saw the flames consuming the bakery. "Caleb!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "I'm here!" But he didn't hear me. His eyes locked onto a figure sprawled on the floor near the front. Lily. She lay there coughing weakly, her hands outstretched as if pleading for help. Caleb hesitated for a second before rushing in. He scooped Lily into his arms and carried her out, disappearing through the smoke-filled doorway. "No," I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "No, Caleb. I'm still here." The flames crept closer, licking at the edges of the storage room. My strength was fading, and the heat was unbearable. I slumped to the floor, my thoughts swirling with disbelief and heartbreak. As the fire consumed everything I had built, a single thought echoed in my mind. He didn't even look for me. The scent of vanilla lingered in the air as my eyes fluttered open. The softness of my sheets wrapped around me like a hug, and for a moment, I felt at peace. But the peace didn't last. My mind jolted as memories of the fire surged forward. The heat, the smoke, Caleb carrying her out. My chest tightened as I sat up abruptly, my heart hammering. But then I froze. The bakery. My room. The soft morning light filtering through the curtains. None of it made sense. The last thing I remembered was... I scrambled out of bed, my breathing ragged as I glanced around. Everything looked the same, but something was wrong. Or maybe it was right. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand. The screen lit up with the date. Today was the day of the fire. "No," I whispered, my fingers trembling. "This can't be real." The morning unfolded exactly as I remembered. Caleb had already left for work, and I heard the faint sound of the coffee maker downstairs. It was eerie, like déjà vu on steroids. I hesitated before heading down, half expecting Lily to be there smirking at me. But the kitchen was empty. Everything was exactly as it had been. The box of pastries for our regular delivery sat on the counter, untouched. The calm felt unreal. I paced the floor, my thoughts racing. Could this really be happening? Was this some kind of vivid dream? Or had I been given a second chance? The weight of the day ahead hit me like a truck. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples as I sat down to steady myself. If this was real, then I had to act. I knew what was coming: Lily's threats, her sabotage, the fire. But this time, I wouldn't let her win. I pulled out my planner and jotted down everything I remembered from that fateful day. Lily's early visit, her smug warnings, the quiet before the storm. I scribbled furiously, mapping out a plan to outsmart her. When I finished, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My messy hair and tired eyes didn't scream hero, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her destroy everything I'd built. I wasn't going to let Caleb's blind loyalty to his ex cost me my life. I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders. Not this time. I left for the bakery earlier than usual, arriving before the staff, and well before Lily's planned sabotage. I immediately checked the ovens, ensuring everything was functioning properly. Then I installed a small camera above the kitchen, positioning it perfectly to catch every move. If Lily thought she could pull the same stunt, she was in for a rude awakening. It was almost noon when the front door chimed and Lily walked in. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her smile sweet but her eyes sharp. My stomach churned as she greeted me with fake warmth. "Morning, Sarah," she said, her voice honeyed. "I thought I'd stop by for some croissants." "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'll have them ready for you in just a minute." I watched her closely as she wandered around the bakery, making polite small talk with the staff. She was stalling just as I expected. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, slipping into the office to check the monitors. Sure enough, as soon as I was out of sight, Lily headed straight for the kitchen. My heart raced as I watched her on the monitor. She moved with purpose, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. Then, just as I remembered, she went to the ovens and began tampering with the dials, cranking up the heat to dangerous levels. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and marched into the kitchen. "Lily?" I said firmly, my voice echoing in the room. She froze, her hand still on the oven dial. "Oh, Sarah," she said, recovering quickly. "I was just..." "Sabotaging my bakery?" I interrupted, holding up my phone to show her I'd been recording. "I've got everything on camera." Her face turned red, and for the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. "You don't understand," she started, but I wasn't in the mood to hear her excuses. "No, you don't understand," I snapped. "You threatened me, you tried to ruin my business, and now I have proof." Without taking my eyes off her, I dialed the police. Lily's confident mask cracked as I described the situation to the dispatcher. She tried to plead with me, her voice trembling. "Sarah, please don't do this," she begged. I wasn't going to let it go that far. I raised an eyebrow. "You locked me in a room and started a fire last time, Lily. Forgive me if I don't believe you." Her eyes widened. "What are you talking about? Last time?" I realized I had slipped, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. I leaned against the counter, watching her squirm. The sound of sirens grew louder, piercing through the otherwise quiet afternoon. I stood near the front counter of the bakery, trying to steady my breathing. My hands trembled, but I clutched my phone tightly, the recorded evidence a lifeline to the truth. The red and blue lights flickered through the windows, and soon enough, two officers entered, their expressions firm but professional. Behind them, Lily stood frozen, her confident facade beginning to crack. "Who called us?" the taller officer asked, scanning the room. "That would be me," I said, stepping forward. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "This woman," I gestured to Lily, "attempted to sabotage my bakery by tampering with the ovens. She also threatened me earlier today." Lily immediately jumped in. "This is ridiculous!" she exclaimed, her voice shrill. "Sarah's just paranoid. I was just trying to help her with the ovens. She's overreacting." I didn't even flinch. "I have proof," I said calmly, holding up my phone. "And there's security footage from the cameras in the kitchen that will back me up." One of the officers nodded. "Let's take a look." I led them to my office, where I had queued up the security footage. The screen showed Lily in vivid detail, cranking up the oven temperatures and deliberately tampering with the equipment. The officers watched in silence as I played the recording, rewinding and zooming in to make sure they didn't miss anything. When it ended, I added, "She also threatened me earlier, saying she would ruin my life if I didn't leave my husband." The officers returned to the main area of the bakery, where Lily was pacing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The tension in the room was palpable. "Miss," the shorter officer said, "we have enough evidence to take you into custody for attempted arson and making criminal threats." Lily's head snapped up, and for a moment, she seemed genuinely shocked. "Wait, you can't be serious," she shouted, her voice rising. "This is all a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," I said, stepping forward. "You were caught on camera. You tampered with the ovens, and I caught you before things could escalate. I won't let you destroy my business or my life." The taller officer reached for his handcuffs, and Lily backed away, her eyes darting around as though looking for an escape. "Caleb!" she cried, spotting him near the entrance. "Tell them this isn't true. You know me. I wouldn't do this." Caleb had been standing silently, his face pale and his shoulders tense. He had witnessed everything, the footage, Lily's threats, the confrontation. Now confronted with the undeniable truth, he looked at Lily with a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Lily, how could you?" She turned on him, her voice desperate. "I did it for us, don't you see? She's the one who's been lying, trying to drive us apart. I just wanted her out of the way so we could be together." Caleb took a step back, shaking his head. "You endangered Sarah's life," he said, his voice trembling. "You lied to me, manipulated me. I don't even know who you are anymore." For a moment, Lily's mask slipped completely. Her face contorted with rage, and she screamed, "She doesn't deserve you! I was here first, Caleb! She took you from me!" The officers moved quickly, handcuffing her as she continued to shout, "You'll regret this, Caleb! You'll regret choosing her over me!" As the police led Lily out of the bakery, her shouts echoed down the street before fading into the distance. I let out a long, shaky breath, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. It was over, at least for now. I turned to Caleb, who stood rooted to the spot, his expression a mix of guilt and disbelief. "Sarah," he began, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," I said, my voice firm. "You chose to believe her over me. You let her come between us. Do you have any idea how close she came to ruining everything I've built?" He opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. Instead, he looked down at the floor, ashamed. In the days that followed, more details about Lily's manipulations came to light. The police discovered messages and notes she had written, outlining plans to sabotage my bakery and win Caleb back. It turned out that Lily's obsession with Caleb ran deeper than any of us had realized. Caleb's family, who had always been supportive of me, were horrified by the revelations. They reached out, apologizing for not seeing Lily's true nature sooner. The bakery remained intact, thanks to the quick action I had taken. I doubled down on security measures, ensuring that nothing like this could happen again. My team rallied around me, offering their support and helping me get back to normal. As for Caleb, he continued to try and apologize, but I wasn't ready to forgive him. "It's not just about Lily," I told him during one of our last conversations. "It's about trust. You didn't trust me when it mattered most." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand, Sarah, and I'm sorry. But sometimes, sorry isn't enough." Standing in the middle of my bakery after closing hours, I looked around and felt a sense of peace. I had faced fire, both literal and metaphorical, and come out stronger. This was my space, my sanctuary, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again, and this time, I was determined to protect what was mine. The bakery was empty, the lights dimmed for the evening. I stood behind the counter, wiping down the display case with slow, deliberate movements. It was one of those tasks that didn't require much thought, perfect for keeping my hands busy while my mind raced. The bell above the door jingled, and I sighed, glancing up. "Caleb," I said flatly, my tone devoid of warmth. He stood in the doorway, looking disheveled. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes red-rimmed. He looked nothing like the confident man I'd fallen in love with. Guilt radiated off him as he took a hesitant step inside. "Sarah," he started, his voice hoarse, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but please, I need to talk to you." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the counter. "I think everything that needed to be said has already been said, Caleb." "Please," he repeated, his voice breaking. "I need to apologize." Caleb walked closer, stopping a few feet away as though afraid to breach some invisible barrier between us. "I was wrong," he said, his words spilling out in a rush. "I was so wrong. I don't even know where to start." "Try the part where you chose Lily over me," I said, my tone sharp, "or the part where you accuse me of being jealous instead of listening to me." He winced at my words, his shoulders slumping. "You're right. You're completely right. I don't even have an excuse for how blind I was. I let her manipulate me, and I didn't see it until it was too late." I let out a bitter laugh. "Too late, Caleb? You didn't just hurt me. You almost destroyed everything I've worked for. Do you have any idea what that felt like, knowing you trusted her over me?" He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I was a fool. She played me, and I let her. I was so caught up in the past, in what we used to have. I didn't realize how much I was throwing away." I shook my head, the weight of everything crashing over me. "It wasn't just about Lily, Caleb. It was about us. I stood by you, supported you, trusted you. And the moment I needed you to do the same, you didn't." "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I failed you. I let you down in the worst way possible. But please, Sarah, I love you. I've always loved you. Can't we try to fix this?" His words should have stirred something in me, but they didn't. Instead, they felt hollow, like an echo of a time that had already passed. I stared at him, searching for the man I used to know, the man I thought would never betray me. But all I saw was someone I couldn't trust anymore. "I can't do this, Caleb," I said, my voice steady despite the tears pooling in my eyes. "You broke something between us that can't be fixed. I don't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's no us." His face crumpled, and he reached out as if to touch me, but stopped short. "Please, Sarah, I'll do anything. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you." I shook my head. "It's too late. You didn't believe in me when it mattered, and now I don't believe in us." He stood there, defeated, his hands hanging limply at his sides. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the nights I'd spent doubting myself, the pain of his betrayal, the fire that could have cost me everything. And I knew I was making the right choice. Goodbye, Caleb, I said softly, stepping back toward the kitchen door. I hope you figure out what you're looking for, but it's not me. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he just nodded, his tears spilling over. Slowly, he turned and walked out of the bakery, the bell jingling behind him. I watched him go, a strange mix of sadness and relief settling over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally free. The morning sunlight streamed through the bakery windows, casting a warm glow on the counters. For the first time in what felt like forever, I walked into the shop without the weight of Caleb or Lily hanging over me. This was my space, my creation, and my sanctuary. And now it was my future. Standing behind the counter, I took a deep breath and glanced around. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the sight of rows of perfectly frosted cupcakes and pastries brought a smile to my face. This was the life I'd built with my own hands. Sure, there had been setbacks, huge ones, but I had survived. And now, I was ready to thrive. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing had become clear. I didn't need Caleb to succeed. He hadn't believed in me when it mattered, but I believed in myself. That was enough. I started pouring more energy into the bakery, experimenting with new recipes and decorating the space to reflect my personality. It was therapeutic, throwing myself into work. My regulars noticed the change, too. "You're glowing these days, Sarah," Mrs. Henderson said as she picked up her order of blueberry scones. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I smiled at her. "Thanks, Mrs. H. It's just good to feel like myself again." With a renewed sense of purpose, I began brainstorming ways to grow the bakery. I updated the menu, adding items that were more modern and unique. The Nutella-stuffed croissants became an instant hit, and the lavender-infused lemon bars flew off the shelves. I also started using social media to promote the bakery. Posting pictures of my creations and sharing stories about the process brought in a new wave of customers. People from outside town began showing up, drawn by the buzz online. One day, a man in a suit walked in, scanning the bakery with an appreciative eye. "This place is incredible," he said, introducing himself as a food blogger. "Mind if I feature you in my next article?" "Not at all," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. The article turned out to be a game changer. Within weeks, the bakery was busier than ever. I hired 2 more staff members to keep up with demand, finally freeing myself from being tied to every task. In the evenings, when the shop was quiet, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the world go by. The peace I felt was something I hadn't known in years. For so long, I'd poured everything into my relationship with Caleb, believing it was the foundation of my happiness. But now, I saw the truth. My happiness was something I had to build for myself. One night, as I looked over the day's earnings, I realized something profound. I didn't feel angry anymore, not at Caleb, not at Lily, not even at myself for letting things go so far. The bakery was thriving. I was thriving. And that was the best revenge I could have asked for. One afternoon, a young woman came into the shop, looking nervous. She introduced herself as a small business owner who admired what I'd done with the bakery. "I've been struggling to get my cafe off the ground," she admitted. "Any advice?" I saw a little bit of myself in her, uncertain, eager, and determined. "Start small, stay consistent, and don't let setbacks stop you," I told her. We ended up talking for an hour, and by the time she left, I realized I wanted to do more than just bake. I wanted to help others find their footing, just like I had. That night, I started drafting plans for a workshop series aimed at aspiring bakers and small business owners. It felt good to think about giving back, to use my experiences, both the good and the bad, to help someone else. As the months passed, I became more confident, more focused, and more content with my life. My bakery was a hub of laughter and delicious smells, a place where I could pour my heart into my work without fear of judgment or betrayal. I didn't need anyone else's approval to know my worth. I'd found that within myself. And as I locked up the shop one evening, the sun setting in brilliant shades of pink and orange, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving.